Story of Agamemnon. Agamemnon was king of Mycenae in Greece. He was married to Queen Clytemnestra and had a son, Orestes, and 3 daughters, Iphigenia, Electra, and Chrysothemis. Agamemnon's brother was Menelaus, king of Sparta. Menelaus had a wife called Helen. Prince Paris seduced Helen, and she left with him to go back to his home city of Troy. Menelaus was very angry at this and demanded that Agamemnon should help him in sending a huge force of Greek ships over to Troy so as to capture the city and regain Helen. Agamemnon was happy to agree. He arranged for over 1,000 ships of men from all over Greece to go to the aid of his brother. But when they were just about to set sail, the wind dropped, and the entire fleet was becalmed. After a few days, Agamemnon asked the priest Calchas what was causing the wind to fail. Calchas consulted oracles and gave his answer. The goddess Artemis, Roman Diana, goddess of hunting, had become angry with Agamemnon, because recently he had shot and killed a deer which was sacred to her in her temple sanctuary at Brauron. Therefore she had stopped the winds from blowing. "What should I do?" asked Agamemnon. Calchas again consulted oracles. His answer was as follows. Agamemnon must sacrifice the one thing that he loved the most. That thing was his own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon was appalled. Could he do such a thing? But he had to. Reluctantly, he arranged the altar, got ready the axe and the sacrificial knife. He pretended to his daughter that he was arranging a sacrifice in preparation for her own marriage. Therefore Iphigenia prepared herself in her bridal dress for the occasion, little knowing its true purpose. The scene was set. Iphigenia left her tent and proceeded towards the altar. But why, she wondered, did everyone look away from her as she approached? Even her father did not look happy. Too late, as she neared the altar, she realized something was afoot. Instead of the embrace she expected from Agamemnon, he brought out from under his robes a dagger. Iphigenia screamed in terror, but hands reached out to grab her and placed her upon the altar. She closed her eyes in terror and prayed, but the remorseless blade hacked through her neck. As soon as Iphigenia had been sacrificed, the wind began to blow again. Quickly the men set to pushing off the ships to sail to Troy to get Helen back for Menelaus, king of Sparta. For 10 years the Greeks fought at Troy. Meanwhile, back in Mycenae, Agamemnon's wife Clytemnestra nursed her hatred of her husband. How could he have killed their most beautiful daughter Iphigenia? She plotted revenge on her husband, and took meanwhile a lover of her own, his cousin Aegisthus, with whom she had intended to rule Mycenae once Agamemnon was dead. At the end of 10 years, the Greek heroes began to return. In the past, an omen had recorded that Agamemnon would die neither on land nor on sea. Was he then indestructible? He certainly had a high opinion of himself. On his triumphal return to Mycenae he brought with him not only the spoils of war, but also a concubine, the beautiful Cassandra, a Trojan priestess, who was able to tell the future exactly as it was going to be, but who was fated never to be believed by anybody. As Agamemnon entered the palace where Clytemnestra was waiting for him, Cassandra saw a vision of her own and his death. Despite this, Cassandra tried to warn him, but Agamemnon still entered the palace. Clytemnestra butchered Cassandra with an axe, and she killed Agamemnon in the same way, at the very moment when he was stepping into his bath, neither on land nor on sea, but effectively on both at the same time. Then, exultant in her assassinations, Clytemnestra displayed the bodies of her husband and his lover to the people. She gloried in his death. This was all very well, but no Greek murder ever goes unpunished, according to the gods' laws. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returning from Troy, wondered what to do. Was it better to kill your mother, or to avenge the death of your father? He was persuaded by the arguments of his sister, Electra, whom Clytemnestra had had married off to a poor farmer, so that no offspring of her would take over the family line. Electra had been brooding over the murders, and had convinced herself that Clytemnestra had committed the worst crime. She had taken a male lover, Aegisthus, and killed her own husband, Agamemnon. She objected her, Electra, to the indignity of an impoverished marriage, and rejected her own son, Orestes. The argument that Agamemnon had deserved his punishment because he had sacrificed Iphigenia was unravelling, because many of the bystanders at that sacrifice were convinced that at the very last moment, as the dagger lunged into her, Iphigenia had been whisked away by a goddess and replaced with a deer. Electra and Orestes plotted their revenge. Aegisthus, Clytemnestra's lover, had never seen the grown-up Orestes. Orestes would therefore gain entrance to the palace secretly by pretending to be a friend, carrying the supposed urn of Orestes' ashes, and claim that Orestes himself had died at Troy. Then Aegisthus would start a sacrifice for celebrating the death of Orestes, for he no longer needed to fear his return, and Orestes would attack. This he did, stabbing Aegisthus in the middle of the sacrifice. Clytemnestra, attracted by the screams, soon appeared, whereupon Orestes stabbed her to death as well. Now the deaths of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus also needed to be avenged. Orestes first fled the country. On his travels he reached the land of the Taurians, in what is now the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea. Landing amongst these barbaric people, he was arrested and discovered, too late, that the Taurians sacrificed all foreigners who reached their soil. Entering the cave of the priestess, whose job it was to prepare the victims, he recognized Iphigenia, his own sister. The story was true. The goddess Artemis had indeed whisked Iphigenia away from under her father Agamemnon's knife and replaced her body with that of a deer. Here she was, alive after all, under the divine protection of Artemis, who, if you remember, that far back, had caused the wind to stop in the first place. Iphigenia was the sacrificial priestess of the Taurians, and she was duty-bound to sacrifice her own brother. But Artemis took pity on the two of them. Escaping the clutches of the evil king of the Taurians, they managed to steal a sacred statue of Artemis from the royal palace, and, returning to Greece, installed it in a special shrine back at Brauron, the sanctuary of Artemis. Orestes was next pursued by Furies, terrible monsters, like women with snakes in their hair and wings on their back, personifications, some might say, of your guilty conscience. These Furies chased Orestes all the way back to the rock of Ares, called the Areopagus in Athens, where he was put on trial. After listening to the arguments of both sides, the gods, the jury, split 50-50. Until, however, the goddess Athene made her casting vote for acquittal. Orestes was allowed to go free. The murder of one's mother is acceptable if it means avenging your father. The Areopagus, therefore, became the chief place for judgment in murder trials in Athens. The story ends.